distance in which you can work with it. So you're at 9 centimeters, and you have to move your body in and out, or focus rails on the tripod to allow you to get focus on the subject. Okay. Now, as mentioned earlier, the basics of photography: aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. If we are shooting in one of the semi-automatics, such as aperture priority or manual, you'll have to have an understanding of how these components of exposure are used to create your macro image. Aperture, or the opening of the lens, will increase or decrease your depth of field. We're usually trying to increase the depth of field, so we're stopping down to small physical apertures or large f-stops to increase our depth of field, and that will in turn make it so we either have to crank up our ISO or the camera sensitivity to light, which will introduce at high ISOs digital noise, decrease your color depth, and decrease the overall image quality. In shutter speed, we have to consider what we're capable of physically, whether we're on a tripod, how low can we go with our speed and still get sharp images. In shutter speed, it's not just how well we can hold our camera, it also depends on if our subjects are moving. So challenge 1, our small depth of field and macro. So the challenges really start stacking up, because as your focal length increases, your depth of field decreases. Most macro lenses are at least somewhat telephoto. The large aperture, so what lets in more light, will give you less depth of field as well. And as you get closer to your subject, as you approach your minimum focus distance at the same equal focal length, your depth of field will also decrease. So we are approaching all these things in macro photography, and we have to overcome them. And here's an example of a shot taken at 100 millimeters at 1:1 reproduction at f4. So this is stop down, one full stop from 2.8 to 1.4, and we can see that the depth of field in this image is still razor thin. So where are we going to make our compromises? Let's start by discussing ISO. And we will decrease our image quality, which, depending on what we are comfortable with, where we are sharing the image, are we looking to print it large, or are we posting it up onto Instagram or Facebook that compresses our files anyways? For these types of sharing, it doesn't matter as much if we're doing high ISO, but if we're doing large prints, it'll really start to show up as the degradation of your image. Different camera bodies will handle ISO better. Like the full frame camera I used to shoot has relatively decent ISO performance, but the sacrifice over using a larger sensor versus a crop frame is that 1:1 reproduction at the larger sensor will only allow me to get bigger subjects in focus. If I go down to an APS-C size camera, the sensor size decreases by the crop factor and allows us to get that much closer to our subject. So it all comes down to knowing what we're working with and what we are comfortable with out of our final product. And here's a shot at 1600, which there's still relatively good retention of details, but you start to see some loss of shadow detail, especially if you're manipulating it in digital editing. So we can decrease our shutter speed, and the rule of shutter speed is 1 over our focal length times the crop factor. So for Nikon shooters, which most of you are, we would take for a 100 millimeter lens and multiply it by 1.5, so we need to be shooting, as a general rule of thumb, at 1/150th of a second at 100 millimeters to reduce hand shake and motion blur in our pictures. and this also varies based on the individual and the environment in which we're shooting. If it's cold, we might be shaking more. If we've had a lot of coffee, we might be shaking more and have to raise that shutter speed. And we have to be cognizant of a proper hand-holding techniques. We want points of contact. We want the camera against our face. We want our elbows into the body, cradling the lens. Exhale, and then squeeze the trigger. We don't want to be stabbing at our trigger because that increases the shape of our lens. And if the subject is moving, we have to adjust our shutter speed based on how much our subject is moving. It's not what we can do. If we can hold at 1/50th stable, but we have a bug scurrying through the image, they're still going to be blurry even if we are keeping our camera sharp. And image stabilization is another feature that some of the higher end macro lenses will possess, or if you're using extension tubes, in electronic extension tubes, it will retain image stabilization. So for still life photos, it will allow us to handheld at, depending on the quality of the image stabilization in the lens, at up to about 4 stops less than what our calculation of crop factor tells us we can handhold. And here's one, it's also shot at 1:1 at 1/80th of a second. And we can see that while the center of the image is sharp, some of the wind motion of the, I'm not sure what you call it, the seedlings blowing off of it are starting to blow. So we have to become familiar with more gear to overcome the challenges of macro. You have to set up the tripod, know when we need to implement the use of our tripod, mainly still life photography. But the good thing is if we're buying a tripod for macro, this will allow us to do our long exposures and our landscape photography as well. Introducing more light is the biggest challenge, and there are many options for doing this. I personally use a ring flash and my off-camera flash, as I mentioned before. And this will allow us to not be concerned as much about the movement of our subjects. We'll be freezing them with the flash exposure. And often we can use this feature to make the background disappear. Fade all the black, as our exposure would otherwise be completely underexposed, but the introduction of the light will light our subject and isolate it in the frames. This is good for removing distracting backgrounds. And then we also have to become familiar with editing software. Now, focusing in macro, when we're that close, little movements of our subject may throw them completely out of focus, and I know my camera struggles with reobtaining focus when, especially on very small subjects. So what I do is I set my camera to its lens to its minimum focus and distance and turn off the autofocus feature, and I focus with my body. I move in and out until the subject's in focus, and once it's in focus is when I snap my image versus letting the camera do the work. We're better than our cameras at getting pictures of these close focus.
So you go from photo to manual?
I switch the lens into manual focus.
And you do that with your 100 millimeter?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now for exposure, we want to attempt to get it right in camera, but in post-production we are able to pull out some of loss of light and correct for some of our images. And again, this comes at decrease in the quality of our image. So we're trying to get it right the first time, but you may only get one shot at the bug. So if you have to pull it up or you have to crop, it's not bad. You'll watch YouTube videos by people like Jared Poland or Chronos Photo who one shot, get it right in camera, which is the mantra of film photography. I definitely try to get it right in camera, but cropping is not the worst thing you can do in macro photography. That often lets us make it so our shots are viewable. And also when we're cropping, it will give us a perceived increase in depth of field, because if we were actually that close, our depth of field would decrease by that much more as you get closer to your subject. And so our solutions, there isn't a solution. What's your vision? What are you going for? Do you want less depth of field in the image to let in more light? Do you want to introduce flash? Now, ring flashes and other flashes may create undesirable catch lights in the subject, may make your lighting flat. It depends on the situation and what we're looking for. Take the shot however you can and learn from it, so when you take the next one, you'll make it that much better. Techniques I use to get a higher percentage of keepers. I always make sure my memory card is clear when I'm going out shooting. I download it to my computer, so that way I'm not limited to the number of shots I have to take. If we're shooting with just in-camera settings, no additional light, I will shoot in burst mode. So when I'm going in and out, focusing on a subject, I have that much better chance of getting that one frame with the perfect focus. Especially when we're shooting insects, if that eye is out of focus, it's a throwaway image. They do not look good. I've seen every time we look at Instagram or Flickr and see an image with an out of focus eye, it's distracting and needs to be in focus. Okay. Now, referencing your LCE chimping, is it a good shot? In macro, if we're doing that when our subject's moving, we won't be able to take that shot again. What I do is I will look at the back of the camera if I'm shooting still life to check if I want more depth of field. But if I'm shooting an insect, I keep it up to my eye, and if I think I might need more, I'll adjust it while shooting so I'm not looking away. I have the subject still framed because we don't want to miss the shot, because we want to admire the shot we just took. We need to keep shooting until the subject's gone.
Are you like walking around your backyard like looking for bugs? Or are you just like hanging out and waiting for them?
Front yard as well. Walking around, sitting, I look crazy. It's a busy city street.
Yeah.
Okay, so for this one, I was using a full stack of 3 extension tubes with the macro lens and the ring flash. And when I took this image, these little bugs along here were completely invisible. I couldn't make it out with the naked eye, as this was probably about 1/4 of an inch large, this ant, and it made it so I could barely make out the eye and what was even necessary to be in focus. I sat out there, probably took 80 shots, maybe 3, 5 were in sharp focus on the eye where the ant was framed by the branch, because once the ant's body is over to the side, it disappears into the background because the background is completely underexposed and all the light in this image is coming from the ring flash. And what could have made it better? I would have liked if I had set up an off-camera flash as a kicker to give some detail in the back legs, just to separate it from the background a little more. And as you can see, the ring flash creates a bit of a flat light across the face, and it almost looks like there's a decrease in sharpness because of the effect it has. But without it, the shot would have been impossible to take. Now, where do I find inspiration to keep shooting? I make a list of shots I want to get. Currently, the one I really want is downtown, of the subway moving in a long exposure, and in the above ground shots I've seen a few posted recently of it going by Jim's Stakeout or different buses, and that's what keeps me going, is making a list of what I want to get for a given date. I also want to get a spider, but it seems the spiders in my backyard are pretty quick, and I've yet to get one in focus.
What if it was dead?
It might help.